The year's 1092. You've spent 3 days disguised as a Sufi mystic, working your way closer to the most powerful man in the Seljuk Empire. And tonight, you're finally close enough to end his life. Your hands are steady, which still surprises you a little, even after months of training for exactly this moment. You're dressed in the simple robes of a wandering holy man, a small dagger hidden carefully against your forearm, invisible beneath the loose fabric. Around you, the royal camp near Nahavand hums, with a low murmur of evening prayers and distant conversation. Torches flickering against canvas tents, stretched out for what feels like miles. Somewhere just ahead, inside a modest tent, set apart from the others, sits Nizam al-Mulk, vizier of the Seljuk Empire, the most powerful administrator in the Islamic world. A man who has spent years trying to crush the movement you now belong to. You've been trained for this exact kind of moment since you were barely more than a boy. How to wait without flinching, how to approach without suspicion, how to become invisible in plain sight. You are a fida'i, a devoted one, a member of the Order of Assassins that outsiders have started calling the Hashashin. Somewhere far behind you, high in the mountains of Persia, sits the fortress of Alamut, and the man who trained you, shaped you, and sent you here, Hasan-i Sabbah. In a few moments, you're going to step forward, and everything you've spent years preparing for is going to happen in less than 10 seconds. But before we get there, let's go back to where all of this actually started. You grew up in a small Persian village, the kind of place where poverty wasn't a temporary condition, but simply the shape of everyone's entire life. Your father died when you were young, some illness that swept through one winter and took half the old men in the village with him. Your mother did what she could, but there were too many mouths and never quite enough bread. And by the time you were 12, you understood with a kind of quiet, hardened clarity that nobody was coming to rescue your family from any of it. Then a stranger came through your village, a quiet, unassuming man who spoke gently, who asked questions instead of giving orders, who seemed genuinely interested in what you believed about God, about justice, about the corrupt Seljuk officials who taxed your village into the ground while living in palaces you'd never even see. He talked about a place in the mountains, a community devoted entirely to justice, faith, and brotherhood, led by a man of extraordinary wisdom. He didn't recruit you exactly. He simply planted a question in your mind. You couldn't stop turning over. What if your life could actually mean something? You left with him a season later. Your mother cried, the same way mothers across this world always seem to cry when their sons walk towards something uncertain. But you remember feeling something you'd never felt in that village. Not fear, but a strange, sharp sense of purpose, like a door opening somewhere you hadn't even known existed. The journey to Alamut took weeks, climbing steadily into terrain that grew harsher and more remote with every passing day, until finally, the fortress itself came into view, carved into the mountains themselves, isolated, almost impossible to reach, which was exactly the point. This wasn't just a castle. It was about to become the only world you knew. You were maybe 13 when you first walked through its gates. You didn't fully understand yet what you were becoming. You just knew, standing there, that the boy who left that poor village behind wasn't ever going to fully return. Alamut isn't like anywhere you've ever lived, and it takes months before it starts to feel like home instead of a strange, beautiful prison. The fortress sits perched on a narrow ridge nearly 2,000 meters up in the Alborz Mountains, surrounded on almost every side by sheer drops and jagged peaks. There's only one real path in, narrow enough that a handful of defenders could hold off an army here, which is exactly why Hasan-i Sabbah chose this spot in the first place. What outsiders will eventually start calling the Order of Assassins didn't just need soldiers. It needed a place the rest of the world couldn't easily reach. Life here runs on a strict, almost monastic rhythm. You wake early, eat simply, bread, dried fruit, whatever the terraced gardens carved into the mountainside managed to produce. Since almost nothing grows easily at this altitude, water is carefully managed through an impressive system of channels and cisterns. Because a siege here isn't a hypothetical threat, it's an expected inevitability eventually. Everyone has a role, a task, a purpose. Nobody sits idle within these walls. What surprises you most, coming from a poor rural village, is the sheer intellectual weight of the place. Alamut houses one of the most impressive libraries you've ever imagined existing. Manuscripts on astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, and theology, carefully preserved and studied. Hasan-i Sabbah himself is known to be a serious scholar, not just a military or religious leader, and that same expectation filters down through everyone living here. You're taught to read, taught to think critically, taught complex theological arguments defending your community's beliefs against the orthodox Sunni establishment that considers you heretics worth exterminating. The community itself feels tight, almost like an extended family stretched across an isolated fortress. You share meals, share labor, share prayers together multiple times a day. There's a real sense of belonging here that you never quite felt in that struggling village you left behind. For the first time in your life, you're surrounded by people who seem to genuinely believe the same things you're starting to believe, who treat the mission you're all part of as something sacred rather than simply survival. But underneath all of it runs a quieter, more serious undercurrent you're only beginning to understand. This isn't just a religious community hiding in the mountains. It's the beating heart of a movement that outside kingdoms fear enough to send armies against, again and again. And everyone here, including you, is being shaped for a role in defending it, whatever that role eventually turns out to be. Your training doesn't start with weapons. It starts with waiting. The instructors at Alamut, quiet, disciplined men who clearly know exactly what they're doing, begin by teaching you patience as a skill, the same way another army might teach swordsmanship. You spend hours, sometimes entire days, sitting motionless in uncomfortable positions, learning to control your breathing, your posture, your expression, until stillness stops feeling difficult and starts feeling natural. This isn't cruelty for its own sake. Later, you'll understand exactly why it matters. A fida'i might spend months, even years, waiting patiently inside an enemy's household before ever being called to act. Language training comes next, and it's far more demanding than you expected. You're taught to speak with different regional accents, to adopt the mannerisms and religious customs of communities outside your own. Sunni scholars, Sufi mystics, merchants, servants. The Order of Assassins doesn't send soldiers charging into battle. It sends men who can disappear completely into someone else's life for as long as necessary, becoming trusted, becoming invisible, long before any blade is ever drawn. Physical training matters too, but it's narrower and more specific than what a regular soldier learns. You're taught close quarters, combat with a short, easily concealed dagger, rather than broad battlefield weapons. Precision over power, speed over strength. Poison becomes part of your education as well, though you learn quickly that it's used carefully and selectively, not randomly, since a body that shows obvious signs of poisoning can expose an entire operation. Every method you learn serves the same underlying philosophy: a single, precise, unstoppable strike against a specific target, rather than open warfare against an army you could never hope to match in numbers. What strikes you most, looking back later, is how much of your training is actually psychological rather than physical. You're taught to genuinely believe, without hesitation, that this mission, protecting your community, striking down its enemies, is worth any personal risk, including your own life. Some instructors speak of paradise awaiting those who die in service to the cause, vivid descriptions of gardens and rewards beyond this world. You've heard whispered stories among the younger recruits about men being given a taste of paradise itself before being sent on their final mission. Though even here, among the faithful, nobody seems entirely certain how much of that story is truth and how much has simply grown into legend over time. By the time your training finally ends, you've become something genuinely rare. Not just a skilled fighter, but a patient, adaptable, deeply committed operative, capable of waiting years, if necessary, for a single decisive moment. You don't know yet who your first target will be. You only know with complete certainty that when the moment comes, you won't hesitate. There's a story that moves through Alamut in careful whispers, one nobody discusses openly, but everyone seems to know in fragments. Somewhere within the fortress complex, hidden behind walls most residents never see past, there's said to be a garden unlike anything else in this harsh mountain landscape. Lush greenery, flowing water, wine, and a beautiful company. A small paradise carved improbably into stone and altitude. According to the story, certain young men selected for the most dangerous missions are given hashish, brought unconscious into this hidden garden, and allowed to wake there believing, if only for a few surreal hours, that they've somehow already died and been welcomed into paradise itself. When they're later returned to ordinary life, drugged once more, they carry the absolute, unshakable conviction that if they die completing their mission, this exact paradise awaits them again, permanently this time. You've never seen this garden yourself, and if you're honest, you're not entirely sure it exists in the way the stories describe it. Much of what outsiders, travelers, rival scholars, and foreign chroniclers like Marco Polo decades later will eventually write about the Order of Assassins gets exaggerated, twisted into something closer to legend than fact, often by people who never set foot inside these walls and had every reason to make your community sound as frightening and fanatical as possible. What you do know from your own experience is simpler and somehow more unsettling than any drug garden could be. The loyalty here doesn't need chemical assistance. It's built, patiently and deliberately, through belief, brotherhood, and purpose, reinforced every single day you spend inside this fortress. Life within Alamut continues around you in its careful, structured rhythm, regardless of which stories are true. Messengers arrive and depart constantly, carrying information between Alamut and the smaller fortified outposts the Order maintains across Persia and Syria. Supplies move up the narrow mountain path in careful convoys. New recruits arrive occasionally, wide-eyed the same way you once were, and you find yourself, without quite realizing when it happened, becoming one of the more experienced faces guiding them. You've changed considerably since that frightened boy first walked through Alamut's gates. Your body has hardened through years of training. Your mind has sharpened through study and discipline. And somewhere along the way, without a single dramatic moment marking the shift, you stopped being someone simply escaping poverty and started being someone the Order trusts completely with its most serious work. That trust is about to be tested. Word moves quietly through the fortress that a mission is being prepared, a significant one, aimed at one of the Order's most dangerous enemies, and your name has been mentioned. Your commanding instructor calls you in alone, which almost never happens, and that alone tells you this is different from anything you've done before. The target, he explains carefully, is Nizam al-Mulk, vizier of the Seljuk Empire, arguably the second most powerful man in the entire Islamic world, after the Sultan himself. For years, Nizam al-Mulk has been one of the Order's most relentless enemies, using his considerable influence to hunt down Ismaili communities, execute suspected members, and pressure regional rulers into crushing any settlement even suspected of loyalty to Alamut. Removing him wouldn't just be revenge. It would send an unmistakable message to every powerful figure in the empire. No amount of guards, no amount of wealth, no amount of political power can fully protect you from the Order of Assassins. If Hasan-i Sabbah decides you need to be removed, you're given weeks to prepare, and every detail matters. You study Nizam al-Mulk's daily routines, his travel patterns, the layout of his household, and the camps he frequently stays in as he moves between cities, managing the empire's affairs. You practice over and over the disguise you'll be wearing, the simple robes of a wandering Sufi mystic, a role chosen carefully because religious wanderers are common enough to attract little suspicion, yet respected enough to be granted occasional access that ordinary strangers wouldn't receive. Your weapon is decided too, a small, easily concealed dagger rather than anything larger or more obvious. The Order's philosophy has always been precision over spectacle, a single controlled strike, not a chaotic confrontation. You practice drawing it smoothly from where it will rest, hidden against your forearm, beneath the loose Sufi robes, over and over, until the motion feels less like a decision and more like simple muscle memory. There's a quiet conversation too, one that happens with every fida'i before a serious mission like this one, about what happens afterward. Escape isn't the priority here, and everyone involved understands that clearly. Missions like this one are built around getting close enough to succeed, not necessarily around getting away afterward. You're asked plainly whether you're prepared for that reality. You answer without much hesitation, because somewhere over these past years of training and belief and brotherhood, you genuinely have made peace with it, in a way that might have seemed impossible to the frightened boy who first arrived at Alamut's gates. The night before you leave, you sit alone for a long while, looking out over the mountains surrounding the only real home you've known for years. Tomorrow, you begin the journey toward Nahavand, toward the Seljuk royal camp, toward the man you've been trained your entire adult life to remove from the world. The Seljuk royal camp, near Nahavand, sprawls across the valley like a small city, hundreds of tents arranged around Nizam al-Mulk's own quarters. A modest tent, by royal standards, deliberately unassuming, though everyone here knows exactly whose it is. You've been moving through the outer edges of camp for 3 days now, robes marking you as just another wandering holy man drifting between fires, accepting simple meals from soldiers, curious enough to ask for a blessing or a prayer. Nobody looks twice at you, that's the entire point. Tonight is different, and your body seems to know it before your mind fully processes why. The evening prayers have finished, the camp settling into its familiar rhythm of low conversation and distant laughter, torches casting long shadows between the tents. You've learned the routine by now. Nizam al-Mulk is being carried in his litter from the evening gathering back toward his private tent, a short journey he makes every single night, surrounded by only a handful of guards who've grown comfortably used to your quiet, harmless presence nearby. Your heartbeat feels unnaturally loud in your own ears as you begin moving, slow and unhurried, the way you've practiced 1,000 times. Panic would be instantly visible. Calm is your only real weapon right now, alongside the small blade resting against your forearm, hidden beneath loose fabric that suddenly feels thinner than it ever has before. You approach from an angle you've studied carefully, positioning yourself along the path his litter must pass, hands folded together in the universal posture of quiet, religious devotion. A guard glances at you. Just a glance, nothing more. The same brief look you've received 12 times over these past 3 days. You lower your head slightly, murmuring something reverent under your breath, and he looks away again almost immediately. The litter draws closer, close enough now that you can hear Nizam al-Mulk's own voice, low and unremarkable. Your hand shifts slightly, fingers finding the hilt of your dagger with a stillness that surprises even you in this moment. Everything after this happens fast, faster than the months of preparation somehow suggested it would. You step forward, closing the final distance in 2 calm, unhurried strides, exactly as you practiced. The strike itself lasts less than a few seconds. Quick, precise, exactly where you were trained to aim. Shouting erupts almost instantly around you. guards reacting a fraction of a second too late, the camp's calm evening rhythm shattering into sudden chaos, torchlight and confused shapes and voices rising all around you. You don't run. Somewhere in your training, in your months of quiet preparation, you already understood this moment might be your last one. And strangely, standing here now, surrounded by shouting and drawn weapons, closing in from every direction, you don't feel the fear you might have expected. You feel instead something closer to completion. The guards reach you within seconds, and there was never really a version of this night where they wouldn't. You're cut down quickly, right there in the chaos and torchlight of the camp, before you're given any real chance to explain, negotiate, or run. It's a fast death, and in the strange clarity of those final moments, you understand that this is exactly how it was always supposed to end. You weren't trained to escape. You were trained to succeed at the one task in front of you, whatever it cost afterward. News of Nizam al-Mulk's assassination spreads through the Seljuk Empire almost immediately, and the reaction is exactly what Hasan-i Sabbah intended it to be. Not just grief, but genuine, widespread fear. If the empire's most powerful vizier, surrounded by guards, moving through his own royal camp, could be reached and killed by a single man in disguise, then no one, anywhere, feels fully safe anymore. Sultans, viziers, and regional governors across the Islamic world start doubling their guards, growing suspicious of wandering strangers, mystics, and servants alike. The Order of Assassins doesn't need a large army to be taken seriously. It needs exactly what just happened here. A message written in a single, unstoppable act. Back at Alamut, your name becomes part of the fortress's quiet, internal history, not celebrated loudly or publicly, but remembered among the Brotherhood as someone who completed what they were asked to do without hesitation. New recruits arriving in the years afterward, frightened and uncertain the same way you once were, hear fragments of your story mixed in among others. Another example of the total commitment expected of anyone who walks through Alamut's gates. Hasan-i Sabbah himself continues leading the order for decades after this, from that same isolated mountain fortress, using this same method, patient, precise, targeted killings rather than open warfare, to defend a community that could never have survived a conventional war against the much larger empires surrounding it. The Order of Assassins will go on to influence political fear across the region for nearly 2 centuries, until the Mongols finally besiege and destroy Alamut itself in 1256. You didn't choose the poverty that first brought a stranger to your village all those years ago. But somewhere between that frightened 12-year-old boy and the composed man who stepped forward in that royal camp, you found something that felt, to you at least, worth everything it eventually cost. So, could you have done it? Spent years training for a single moment, knowing full well it might be the last thing you ever do? That's what makes this story so different from the others we've told here. This isn't a battlefield with thousands of men around you for cover. It's one person, one blade, and a belief strong enough to walk willingly toward an ending most of us spend our entire lives trying to avoid. The Order of Assassins didn't need armies to shape history. They needed exactly this: patience, precision, and absolute conviction. If stepping into this one gave you chills, that's exactly what we do here. Every episode, a new life, a new world, a new person you've never had to imagine being until now. Subscribe if you want more of these. Subscribe if you